Right, ladies and gentlemen, we're just about ready to get underway with our next speaker. This is Dr. Dominik Thor, who's going to speak to us about how we can revolutionize like copyright and intellectual property using blockchain technology. So, big hand for Dr. Dominik Thor, please.
Thank you so much, and thanks for the opportunity of being here and talking to you a little bit about, I would say, a completely different use case to many of those that you have heard before when it comes to blockchain technology, and one that is very dear to me. I will tell you how we came up with it, and that's a very personal story. I used to be in banking back in the day, but then I co-founded a small biotech company. And obviously, when you work with a number of leading universities, ranging from Johns Hopkins University to the Technical University of Munich, and you produce new molecules and such, then you have something that you really want to protect, right? That's IP, these are inventions that you eventually want to monetize. But it's not only that, you also do a lot of basic research on a university level, which probably is not going to get monetized, but at the same time, you as a researcher want to make sure nobody, can claim that it's yours, so you also make defensive publications, basically. You usually do that in journals with the problem that you have an idea in a field of biotechnology, and then you have to do all the research, and then you have to create an article out of that, and then it gets published, and probably you get turned down by one or two of these big impact factor journals where everybody wants to get published. So in between the time of your original idea and the time you get protection through defensive publication, there could be 12 months in between, or maybe 18, and that makes it possible for others to overtake you. So with this, so to speak, this information, we said, well, we want to use blockchain technology, and we are quite sure that with the abundance of projects out there, somebody will have thought of this use case, and we try to find some company that offers such a kind of service where you protect intellectual property through blockchain. And well, we didn't find anybody. And the next thing we did is we reached out, to the big stakeholders in intellectual property, and we asked them. And the organization that we came in touch with, obviously, was WIPO. WIPO is a United Nations agency. That's the highest authority you can find for intellectual property. More or less what they do is they make the regulation for all the patent offices in the world. And we reached out to them. And the next thing that happened is they invited us over, and I sat together with Mr. Yo Tagagi. He is the assistant general director there. And he said, well, we know about the potential of blockchain to really disrupt this sector. It's a multi-billion US dollar industry. You have people, not only researchers or companies, you have private individuals creating intellectual property every day, because we are not talking just about inventions here or scientific research. We're talking about music, photos, text, code, in-game assets, 3D designs, whatever you can think of. All that is intellectual property, and all that is regulated through the rules set down by WIPO. And they said, well, you know what, we are not a service provider, but we can support you. And this is why we have now an official partnership with their tech division called WIPO Green, and we have two of the former directors on board. But maybe let me start by talking a little bit about IP definition. I'm very sorry that this is abstract. The problem is these guys have been so friendly, they gave me half an hour. Normally, I pitch it a bit differently, but I trust that you, after your break, are fresh and will take the time to really understand how important this is for this big industry. So you do have basically two types of intellectual property rights. I mentioned before the difference between inventions and art. So basically, when you create something like art, like pictures, like music, whatever, you automatically get a copyright to that, you as the author. So the only thing that you have to do in a legal proceeding is you have to prove that you did it prior to anyone else. Whereas for those intellectual property rights that are awarded, like patents, well, you have to ask somebody for it. Like a patent office on a national level, you get it granted. Again, if it's new, if you are the first one to make it. So I think that's very important here, that when you talk about intellectual property, the The basic requirement is that it's completely new, and to prove that has been very difficult in the past. If you talk to some lawyer, to somebody from an IP department, they instantly get the idea of IpChain database, because from a technological perspective, using blockchain technology is pretty easy to produce a timestamp and show that somebody has done something at a certain point in time. Whereas if you want to do that in court or in a legal proceeding, well, you do have witnesses, but they may not be reliable, or the other party has other witnesses. You have your own notes, but who can claim that you actually wrote this down maybe a year ago and not just 2 months? You may have a website where you released something, but that's not immutable. So these are the challenges, the unsolved challenges for what we call innovators, so everybody in the field producing intellectual property. So the practical application requires you to have definitive proof that you did something. Defensive publication, remember what I said before, when you do it the traditional route with magazines, that simply takes a lot of time, and all that time you are exposed to others overtaking you, because there are trends in research as well. Then there are other aspects to it, because blockchain is not static. You can do much more than just upload information once. I don't want to talk too much about us as a company, but the confidential sharing of intellectual property, that is very complex, and that is something that we also wanted to solve and think blockchain can help with that. And of course, the transfer is intransparent. So even the patent office knows very well who has filed the patent, but they don't know who's the current owner of these rights. So all that, I think, can be solved with blockchain for reasons that I probably don't have to explain to an audience such as yourself. It's quick and cost effective. It's incorruptible, and it's flexible. So basically, that's why we came in touch with so many partners, that as soon as we either mention blockchain, if they have some previous experience, or once we have explained what we are going to do, we're really, really interested to get, so to speak, a partnership going with us. So we are now supported by Dennemeyer Group and WIPO. Dennemeyer Group is the largest IP law firm worldwide, or at least a contender for the first place. I think there are always arguments about who has how many offices where. Well, they are active on 5 continents. They are real big. And we have WIPO on board. We are in very close contact with, I would say, all the major patent offices around in Europe. That's the European Intellectual Property Office for trademarks and the European Patent Office, which are both very, well, I would say, into crypto. They understand it. They have their own research laboratories. But again, they're not a service provider. So they're actively looking for partners in that field. And we are also trying to get on board all the different stakeholders that represent possible users in the future, because they are going to be affected. So we work together with universities, with organizations that represent researchers, such as the Marie Curie Alumni Association. That's one of the biggest funding programs for scientific research in Europe. They represent, I think, more than 11,000 researchers at the moment. Basically, they're our beta testers. And yeah, you see some of the names here. And again, just trying to focus not so much on our solution, but on the basic problem. I mentioned before the different types of IP. So these are inventions, research, art, photos, music, ranging up to code for games, where you can differentiate between in-game assets, like 3D art or whatever, the code itself, and the gaming mechanics. All these are different aspects, and all of them can be supported, the protection of them can be supported by blockchain technology. And it's very important that you do it with following these WIPO standards to ensure that all the patent offices will actively use our software, or any other software that's made in this regard, follow international classifications and such. Basically, the system that we have devised, and I'm not saying that it couldn't be used in other cases, but it's, again, I think, very straightforward. So when talking about protecting intellectual property, basically what you can do is you can safely store it on the blockchain. I will come to the specifics of that in a minute. But imagine a system where you put everything in a safe digital vault, and from then onwards you decide what you want to do. And one of the aspects could be the publication, right? What I mentioned before. You put it out there, and that gives you protection in I would say, well, different contexts. So first of all, if you have the copyright to something, you can prove you did it first. That's fine. I think you are done with that. If you have new inventions, it probably even prevents you from filing your own patent unless you are based in the US or Canada or Japan where you have a grace period. But again, it can have some definitive advantages to publish that if it's basic science. But you can do much more with blockchain, and I think that's where it becomes really interesting. You can safely share that confidential information. I think it's very important here to stress the fact that you're probably all aware of that, that most of the findings of the information in a company is not protected by patents, not only because of the costs, but also because it's simply not possible. Think of Coca-Cola, the formula. It's just water and sugar. Still, it's worth billions, and it's a secret they want to keep secret, and they have to share that sometimes with producers or other partners. So imagine in the context of a university or so on, you have a similar situation where you want to share that. And there are solutions to that. The whole intellectual property system works. It's a working system. We're not talking about replacing it. We're about making it faster, easier, simpler, and also hopefully less costly for people. And one of the things is if you want to share something, you usually use non-disclosure agreements. And again, that could be, it's not a problem probably for Google out there, whoever has a very strong IP department, but you know, for the regular guys, you and me, smaller companies, maybe universities, which I know from personal experience are not as efficiently run as you would expect them to be in some cases. You have a head of a department who should be, making all the big decisions, but you have the individual professors doing the IP and then doing with it whatever they think is good in terms of protecting them. So sharing this by simply having a platform where the information is stored on the blockchain, and once you share that confidential information, people first have to sign a non-disclosure agreement that is again put on the blockchain, is like a huge benefit. People can prove that the other party has only got access to this information after they agree to the terms that you stipulated. So that's, again, a big change, even though we are not reinventing the wheel here. We are just putting this onto the blockchain. And I think when I, as a small-time investor, of course, unfortunately, look out for projects, I always try to find those who don't tell me about, creating a niche market or so. I rather invest into a product where I know there's an existing multi-billion industry behind it, and we just use this technology, which is amazing, to facilitate things, to speed them up, or to make them more secure. And all these things apply in IP. We can use the same kind of infrastructure and architecture also to facilitate deals. So you can sell your IP, you can license it, and share it with others in a way that you can have total proof, of each and every step, when it was got accessed, when it was transferred, and so on and so forth. And that's information that, of course, many parties are interested in, not least among them the patent offices themselves. So when it comes to using blockchain for IP purposes, I think the users are coming from a variety of backgrounds. It could be inventors themselves, or scientists, or artists. Could be companies. Well, these represent, of course, also scientists and developers. And then, of course, all the authorities here that will use such solutions for their own research and might at some point actually, change their whole system. So there are talks about using blockchain for their own databases and system. But I think it will have to be us, the users, the service providers, to make sure that people understand that this is a safe technology, that this technology has distinct advantages over what is out there. And let me give you one example, talking about defensive publications. Again, it's all very abstract, and it's good, I think, if you have examples to better understand this. Let's imagine you own a company and you have come up with some new invention and you have filed patents, and you have to do that on a national level, like everywhere you want to protect your product or where you want to sell it, and maybe you spend £1 million on that worldwide. That's not a, I would say, unrealistic figure here. And then, of course, as a company, well, you do make changes to your product. You make maybe a little bit more research, and you make incremental changes. So what does that mean? Theoretically, any other party that has come up with the same new ideas, adding on top of your existing patents, could file such a new patent, thus rendering those you originally paid for, well, ineffective more or less. So what you usually do is this so-called defensive publication, not in a scientific environment, as a company. There are a number of prior art databases out there that you can use. You simply make it known, and by that prevent anyone out there from filing a patent. And remember, you even prevent yourself from filing a patent, but you don't need it because you got an existing one. That doesn't cost you anything. You already paid for it. So it's very important, and there are databases out there like ip.com, which are, I would say, a good service, but they charge you $350 to do something like that. And then they store this information on, for instance, a server-based system. And I remember we as a company, we were approached by Siemens, and they were, actually we didn't do any PR outside of crypto at that time, but they said to us, well, okay, we got what you want to do, and we think that's real valuable. But you are a startup, right? So there is the risk of you going out of business. And that's where the beauty of blockchain comes in. Well, I told them, guys, the thing is, you're completely right. It could happen. I mean, we don't think so, and we hope certainly that it won't happen. But if it does, imagine what's going to happen. The data is going to stay on the blockchain. So actually, it will be much safer than even having an established company running a server, because the server could, I don't know, crash, burn down. There could be other technical problems, and that is all solved with the blockchain. And I think that's the beauty to it, and makes you understand why we can offer all these things. So generally speaking, blockchain in IP could offer proof of authorship, superior defensive publication. It could protect the freedom of use here. So again, we are talking about science. In many cases, that's like open source, right? Where we just want to make sure, okay, you came up with basic science, an idea that maybe advances a certain field of technology, and you want to be able, to further work into this direction, and not having a big company maybe file a patent and then you are prevented from doing any more work here. We can improve chances of pre-seed financing. We can do that by making it easier to do defensive publication, and then you still have a window of opportunity in many countries to still file a patent, like Canada and the US and Australia and whatever. So I think that's the right thing to do. You protect yourself, or you retain the right to file a patent, and you can find investors to actually fund your product or the patent itself. You can defend patents, like I said before. With these defensive publications, you can safely share intellectual property, thus making it, less risky to work together cross-border. I think that's very important. Many people, they sit, on their inventions and IP and are afraid to share it and actually work with it. I think we can improve that. We can safely transfer ownership. We have much better security against any kind of data corruption. Nobody will be, relying on us as one possible provider here, but they have this immutable blockchain they can trust. And of course, if so much data is then on the blockchain, you can better identify trends. So the feature list is probably nothing that you will be able to read from here on. So let me skip it. It basically relates only to our product, which more or less will do everything I told before. But I think this kind of architecture is the one that we are using, and is a good example of how it could be done. Probably in the future there will be other services that do it differently. The thing is, as you can imagine, there are different types of intellectual property, and they need different kinds of resources in terms of data size. So obviously, if I have an invention like described in a text doesn't need much storage. But when we're talking about videos or music that you want to protect, and remember, even uploading them or being mentioned on Wikipedia is definitely not enough proof in court. Then you have to do something different. And what we do is we use IPFS storage, interplanetary file system, which is basically the Web 2.0. Excuse me for trivializing that. But essentially, that gives us the possibility to store large amounts of data without essentially any costs or much costs. And we put the smart contracts onto the blockchain. So we try not to put too much data on the blockchain itself for obvious reasons, but instead we have the hash linking to the original file. So in the end, you will have the proof that you have the timestamp, and that leads to the data that you uploaded. And the only thing that we need to store locally still is for indexing purposes in order to provide the best search features for patent offices that will use a system such as ours. That is something that you will have still on a server. But even if it gets lost, I mean, that would be unfortunate, but that still means that your IP is still safe on the blockchain. Maybe it won't be that easy to find for others, but you can point to it, and that's the whole reason behind it. I think that's all from my side. I would be very happy to answer any questions you might have in this regard. Once again, I try to stick more to the generalness of the project. I would be happy to discuss IpChain database with you maybe in a break outside. We are currently doing our pre-sale. Our main token sale is coming up end of May. So happy to talk about that. But maybe in this forum here, let's keep it to IP and blockchain.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. Round of applause for Dominik. Right here. So get thinking about some questions for Dominik. I've got one right here. Let me just pull the lights up again. There he goes. Let's see what we've got.
So great presentation, and I think this is a really good use of the blockchain. So well done on that. My question is about the immutability of blockchain, which is a great thing. But in terms of patents, of course, can be revoked. They can be invalidated. So you have to cope with those kind of scenarios. And I'm wondering what you've done to cope with that use case in your solution.
Well, that's actually a very good question here. The thing is, as I said before, we are not replacing a system here. So the final authority on how that information that is stored by us is going to be used are going to be either the patent offices themselves that do their research and then take a look at it and say, okay, that's relevant or not, or it's decided in court by a judge or whoever, a leading expert. So actually, we are just a service provider. So we more or less offer you a possibility to safely store that information, to safely transfer it, to safely sell it. If it's the basis for another patent or contradicts an existing patent, that's something that we cannot really do anything about. Of course, there has been the question of whether we should try to evaluate, whether the information that gets uploaded onto our software is actually new or unique. But on the other hand, it wouldn't really matter because the responsibility lies with the National Patent Office. So even if I said, well, guys, I promise you, I checked it, it's really new, they wouldn't believe me anyway.
So thank you for that. What about in the case of copyright? Because that does get a lot murkier. Particularly with fair use or derivative acts, it can be much harder to assert who has copyright over something.
Yeah, you're completely right once again. The thing is, that's one of the reasons why we said we really see copyrights as a great use case example of IpChain database. The problem is, in many of these cases, and we are again not able to change that, it's like a race to the finish line. The first to file will remain so. So for instance, you are an author. If I manage to steal away your idea before you have published it, either by a traditional means or on our platform, and I file it before you, you may have a hard time to prove that it's actually yours. So that's nothing, unfortunately, that we can do anything about because there is a legal system in place, and of course, we don't want to replace it, but we couldn't because it's about enforcing the system. So we have to trust into our courts doing the right thing. But what we can do, as a user or a possible participant in such a legal proceeding, we can make sure that we have the best possible kind of proof. And I think that can be achieved with blockchain.
Hey, Dominik, do you see this providing services to other blockchains? Say if you've got something like Steam that is content creation, could you somehow link them together so that every time I post something on Steam, it almost copyrights it immediately?
Yeah, well, actually, these are things that we are looking into. We are talking to Adobe, for instance, because like every user of Photoshop or InDesign creates things that are copyright protected, like automatically, and talking about making it part like of their, I would say, yeah, software family.
So it's kind of part of the workflow, is it?
Yeah, exactly. So I think there are many possible use cases. I mean, it's very early stage. I mean, after all, we are going to release a demo in 3 weeks' time. So that's what everybody is waiting for. We also been in touch with a very large provider, actually the largest one out there for legal software. They're also interested in learning more about that. Personally, I haven't heard the name before, but they're real big. So I think it could be used for many. It doesn't necessarily just have to be, our system, of course. We definitely will be the first one on the market with I think, a very good solution. One of the major aspects that we focused on so far was also the user interface design, because we have so many possible different user groups here, coming from the perspective, of a corporate environment, or rather, just a normal guy doing his work, creative work whatsoever. So it has to be both complex and simple to use, not complex to use, but it has to be holistic in what it does.
Yeah. Having lots of features and it being easy to use at the same time.
Exactly, that's always difficult.
Who else would like to ask Dominik a question? Or should I put you on the spot? My man right here.
A real quick question, maybe under the skin. Why does this service need a token?
Well, it's going to, that's a good question also, very funny, because I mentioned before IP.com, which is an established service in this industry, and they actually also use a voucher system. So everything that you will do on IpChain database is going to need the utility token that we provide. It could just very well be that we accept fiat payments by big companies and then exchange them into tokens, because that's what our system is running on. But basically, I think it's actually a very good use case of a utility token where you say, okay, I get information, I want to publish that. You will be able to do so for whatever. Let's say it's one IP token that you use on that. What I can say now is that we definitely can be cheaper as a service than established providers, thanks to the architecture that we use. And that's also something that we want to do. We want to support, individual people and researchers, and in many of these partnerships that we have also have, some agreement as to how we can support members of these organizations or specific topics where we say, okay, we contribute to that by making it a little bit cheaper for you to save that, which I find only fair, given that we have an architecture where things are, well, I would say, in a very nice setup, so that we can still make money without, overcharging.
Cool. I like the fact that you've left the disclaimer lingering, just to make sure everyone's seen that. So any final questions? Right here. Anybody else?
So my question is regarding defending your intellectual property. So if you've got a trademark, for instance, a registered trade, or if someone's looking to register their trademark, is the IP database searchable? So the patent offices can check it before awarding a registered trademark to a customer,
yes.
to a client?
Yes, actually everything is accessible by the public. That's one of the very important factors for determining whether that's a defensive publication, if it's publicly accessible. We are going to offer, I think, a very good search engine where you can look through all the assets that are located there, looking for keywords, author name, within the different types of intellectual property. And what we will also be offering is APIs for the different patent and trademark offices, so they can use their own meta search tools if they have them available. So for instance, there is IPOC, that's from the European Patent Office, the meta search tool. If you take a look at our white paper, the section about APIs is actually written exactly for IPOC. So that's something that we already discussed, how to do that. Many other countries, to my surprise, don't have any such, tailor-made solution. So for instance, the US TPO, the American Trademark and Patent Office, seems to be happy to use our web-based search engine, which I think will be working great. But as of course, you want the examiners to use what they are, working with best.
Are they all willing? Sorry. So are they all willing and recognize the database as something that they can take a decision on? So not just the European patents offices, so global patents offices, they recognize your database and prevent someone else registering a trademark through the traditional means.
Yeah, well, again, they see us more as a prior art database. So if you want to register something with the patent office, you still have to go through the patent office. But coming back to this question of whether they regard us as prior art database in terms of, okay, whether that is, valid for them to look it up and say, okay, if it's not featured there, then it's probably new. Yes, that's the beauty of working with WIPO regulations, because basically all the patent offices follow these regulations, and as long as you work within these limits, more or less you as the person filing, you're paying the patent office to do the research. So they are, of course, they have the responsibility to their best ability to use all the means available. We are going to be one of them. And yeah, therefore, I would say yes, without making any promises here, because theoretically, of course, they could simply decide not to use it on an individual level. It's very hard to enforce that. From the talks that we have had with USTPO, SIPO, GPO, all the abbreviations, the funny ones, so all the major ones, I have the impression that they are very much looking forward to a service like ours. To be totally honest here, I don't think there is any exclusivity here. It's just that I think we have a very good idea for such a system and the software, and they are looking for service providers in that regard. And actually, when I mentioned before the European Intellectual Property Office, they have this observatory located in Spain, and these guys, they really know their blockchain. I can promise you, I had a talk with them, and they said, yeah, you know what, Dominik, that's really refreshing, because you are one of the guys from blockchain who knows a little bit about IP and understands it and gets it right. And I was thinking, like, well, you sound like the blockchain guys here, because they are real pros. They know their blockchain, but of course they have a different focus, right? They are regulators and they're not service providers. We are happy to provide the service.
Alrighty then. So we're just about out of time for this segment. So one more round of applause for Dominik, please.
Thank you.